The city of New York pulsed with life, neon lights reflecting against the glass walls of towering skyscrapers. Taxis honked impatiently, food carts lined the sidewalks with the smell of pretzels and hot dogs drifting in the air, and people rushed about as if every second of their day was worth gold. In this dazzling chaos stood a young immigrant from Indonesia named Tarmaji, 27 years old, wearing a simple jacket and worn-out sneakers. He had arrived only a few months earlier from a small village in East Java, carrying little more than determination and his late grandfather's wisdom. Back home, life had been simple but harsh. His family's income came from tending rice fields, and there was rarely enough money to cover even the basics. When his father fell ill and his younger siblings needed schooling, Tarmaji decided he could not just stand by. The United States, with its reputation for opportunity, seemed like a distant dream that could rescue his family from poverty. So, with borrowed money and a brave heart, he took a flight to New York, the city where people claimed dreams either thrived or shattered. At first, the transition was overwhelming. The language barrier often made him nervous. Although he had studied English, his accent was strong, and words sometimes failed him in fast conversations. Yet he refused to give up. After weeks of searching and rejection, he was fortunate to find work at a private hospital in Manhattan. His role was humble: cleaning rooms, delivering supplies, and assisting nurses when they needed an extra hand. Some staff ignored him, others offered polite smiles, but he never let pride stand in the way of duty. Every morning he woke before dawn, catching the subway from his tiny rented room in Queens. He carried with him not only the will to work hard, but also a quiet strength inherited from his grandfather, a traditional healer in their village. Though he had no formal medical degree, he had learned techniques of massage and herbal remedies since boyhood. To him, healing was not only about the body, but also about the spirit. Despite the constant rush of New York, Tarmaji kept his values intact. He bowed respectfully to elderly patients, offered kind greetings even to those who never replied, and worked with a quiet diligence that soon caught the attention of the nurses. He never complained, even when shifts stretched into the late hours. He told himself that every mop stroke, every bedsheet he folded, was a step closer to sending money home, to ensuring his siblings would not have to abandon school. But fate had more in store for him than simply survival. On his first week at the hospital's VIP wing, he encountered something that would test not only his patience, but also the very skills passed down through generations. Behind the closed door of one room lay a young woman, pale and unmoving, connected to machines that beeped steadily in the silence. Though he did not know it yet, this moment was the beginning of a journey that would change his life, and perhaps even the city's belief in what love and sincerity could achieve. The VIP wing of the Manhattan Hospital was quieter than the bustling lower floors. The corridor smelled faintly of disinfectant and polished marble, and the doors were marked with golden nameplates for patients who could afford the best care. As part of his new assignment, Tarmaji was instructed to keep these rooms spotless. He approached his tasks with the same quiet humility he carried everywhere, yet one particular room drew his attention in a way no other did. Inside, a young woman lay motionless on the bed, her body surrounded by machines. Her nameplate read Sophia Reynolds, a name well known in New York's business world. She was 23, the only daughter of Richard Reynolds, a powerful businessman who owned a chain of health technology companies. Sophia's skin was pale, her long dark hair spread across the pillow like ink on paper, and her eyes remained closed as if she had been asleep for years. The nurses whispered stories whenever they passed by. Sophia had been in a terrible car accident nearly a month earlier. Despite the efforts of top neurologists and international specialists, she had slipped into a deep coma. The doctors had done everything science could offer: medications, therapies, even experimental treatments. But nothing worked. For her parents, the days stretched like endless winters, each hour reminding them that their daughter might never return to them. Tarmaji entered her room every morning with his cleaning supplies. He would replace the drinking water, adjust the curtains, and dust the side tables. But unlike most staff who performed their duties mechanically, he always paused to greet her softly. "Good morning, Miss Sophia," he would whisper in his accented English. "The sun is shining today. I hope you can feel it." He knew she could not respond, but it felt wrong to treat her as if she were invisible. Over time, he began to notice the small details others overlooked: the way her fingers twitched faintly when the air conditioning grew too cold, the slight tension in her neck muscles that no one paid attention to. Memories of his grandfather teaching him about energy points and nerve pathways returned to him. Back in his village, he had once helped a paralyzed neighbor move again after months of careful massage. The thought would not leave his mind. Could the same ancient technique help this young woman? The idea seemed ridiculous. Here he was, a simple immigrant cleaner in a prestigious New York hospital, daring to think he could succeed where world-renowned doctors had failed. Still, his heart would not let go of the possibility. Every evening as he left the hospital, the image of Sophia lying helpless in that silent room haunted him. He felt an unusual pull, as though destiny itself was urging him to act. One afternoon, gathering courage, he approached the Reynolds family in their private waiting lounge. Richard Reynolds sat rigidly in a suit, his stern face hiding exhaustion, while his wife, Elizabeth, tried to maintain her composure despite the weariness in her eyes. Clearing his throat nervously, Tarmaji bowed slightly and spoke with respect. "Mr. Reynolds, Mrs. Reynolds, forgive me if I'm bold, but I have knowledge of traditional healing from my homeland. If you would allow me, I wish to try and help your daughter." The room fell silent. Their skeptical eyes rested on him, caught between despair and disbelief. Neither could imagine that hope might come from the hands of a man who had been sweeping their daughter's floor. For a long moment, the room remained heavy with silence. Richard Reynolds leaned back in his leather chair, his sharp eyes narrowing at the young immigrant who had dared to suggest something that sounded more like folklore than medicine. His wife, Elizabeth, pressed her palms together tightly, her expression torn between hope and fear. Tarmiji lowered his head respectfully, waiting for their response, though his heart thundered in his chest. "You mean to tell me," Richard finally said, his voice deep and steady, "that after some of the best neurologists in the world have failed, you believe your village remedies can do what modern science cannot?" His words carried a sting, not meant to humiliate, but to protect his daughter from false promises. Tarmiji swallowed hard. "I do not claim miracles, sir. Only sincerity. In my village, I learned from my grandfather. He was a healer. I've seen people regain movement after being told they never would. I cannot guarantee results, but I promise I will cause no harm. Just massage, gentle touch, and prayer." Elizabeth's eyes softened at his humility. She had seen countless doctors enter with arrogance, each one confident only to leave disappointed. But this young man's tone was different, not confident in himself, but in the power of trying. She turned to her husband and whispered, "Richard, what do we have left to lose? We've tried everything. Maybe this is God's way of sending help from where we least expect it." Richard exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. He wanted to dismiss the idea as nonsense, yet he could not ignore the desperation gnawing at his heart. He looked again at Tarmaji, this man who worked quietly in the background, never once asking for recognition. There was something in his eyes, not ambition, not greed, but genuine compassion. "Very well," Richard said at last, his voice cautious but resolute. "You may try. But under one condition, you will work only at night when it does not interfere with medical care. If there is no improvement in a week, you stop immediately. Do you understand?" Tarmaji bowed deeply, gratitude flooding his chest. "Yes, sir. Thank you. I will do my best." That evening, as the city's lights shimmered outside the hospital windows, Tarmaji prepared for what felt like the most important task of his life. In his small rented room, he carefully unwrapped a cloth bundle he had carried all the way from Indonesia. Inside was a small bottle of herbal oil crafted from red ginger, lemongrass, and coconut, ingredients his grandfather had sworn by. He warmed it gently between his palms, the aroma filling the room with memories of home. When the clock struck 10, he quietly entered Sophia's room. The machines hummed softly, their steady beeps marking the fragile rhythm of her life. He whispered a prayer in Javanese, asking for guidance, then began. His hands moved gently along her back, pressing specific points with deliberate care. The technique was not about force, but about awakening hidden currents in the body, encouraging circulation and releasing blocked energy. He worked slowly, each movement filled with respect, as though speaking to her through touch. "Be patient, Miss Sophia," he murmured. "We will fight this long sleep together." Outside the room, a nurse passed by, peeking in curiously. To her, it seemed absurd that a janitor-turned-assistant was massaging a billionaire's daughter. Yet there was something undeniably calm about the scene. For the first time in weeks, the room no longer felt like a prison of silence. It felt alive, as though hope had tiptoed back in. The first night passed quietly. After finishing the massage, Tarmeji carefully covered Sophia with a warm blanket, tidied the room, and bowed slightly before leaving. Nothing extraordinary had happened, yet he carried within him a strange peace. He told himself not to expect miracles overnight. Healing, as his grandfather had always said, was like coaxing a flower to bloom. It required patience, consistency, and love. The following nights, he repeated the same ritual. He would arrive when the hospital grew quiet, when most doctors had gone home and the hallways echoed with only the faint footsteps of night nurses. Each time, he would warm the oil in his palms, whisper a silent prayer, and begin tracing the nerve pathways along Sophia's back and shoulders. His hands worked slowly, almost like an artist painting a canvas of life onto a body that seemed trapped in stillness. At first, the nurses scoffed. "It's useless," one muttered under her breath. "The doctors couldn't do anything." What makes him think he can? Yet curiosity soon replaced skepticism. They began to linger outside the door, watching the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the way he spoke softly to a woman who could not reply. There was no arrogance in his actions, only sincerity. Even Dr. Jonathan Smith, a senior physician known for his stern nature, peeked in one evening. He did not interfere, but he stayed longer than he intended, leaving with an unreadable expression. On the fifth night, something happened. As Tarmeji pressed a point near Sophia's shoulder blade, her right hand twitched ever so slightly. It was small, so small that anyone could have dismissed it as reflex. But Tarmeji froze, his breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer, watching intently. The movement did not repeat, yet he was certain it had happened. His heart pounded with cautious excitement. The next morning, one of the nurses who had also witnessed the faint twitch reported it to Dr. Smith. In his office, the doctor summoned Tarmeji. "Is it true?" he asked, his tone clipped yet curious. "If you can hear me, know that you are not alone." On the seventh night, the room held its breath. As he pressed the base of her neck, Sophia's lips parted slightly. A faint sound escaped, almost like the beginning of a word. Her eyelids trembled, though they did not open. Tears burned in Tarmeji's eyes. He knew this was no accident. The silent girl in the hospital bed was beginning to respond. And for the Reynolds family, who had nearly surrendered to despair, this was the first fragile whisper of hope. The following morning, the atmosphere in the Reynolds household shifted subtly. For weeks, the family had walked through the hospital corridors with heavy steps, weighed down by despair. But now, a fragile spark of anticipation lingered in their expressions. Elizabeth Reynolds clutched her husband's arm as they listened to Dr. Smith explain what the nurses had observed. "There has been some minor response," he said cautiously. "Twitches, faint lip movement. It's too early to call it progress, but it is not meaningless." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. She turned to her husband, whispering, "Richard, do you hear that? Our Sophia. She's fighting." But Richard remained guarded, unwilling to give in to hope too quickly. "We'll see," he muttered, though deep down he too felt the ice around his heart begin to crack. Meanwhile, Tarmeji carried on with his nightly ritual. Each evening, he approached Sophia's room with renewed focus, treating his task with almost sacred devotion. He began to extend the massages slightly longer, incorporating gentle stretches and light touches along her arms and hands to stimulate motor response. He noticed her breathing would deepen when he pressed certain points, as though her body was slowly remembering what it meant to be alive. Nurses who had once mocked him now waited silently at the door. Some even began to believe. "There's something different about the room when he's there," one said softly. "It doesn't feel like despair anymore. It feels alive." By the second week, Sophia's responses grew stronger. Her fingers curled faintly when pressure was applied to her palms. A soft moan escaped her lips during one session, startling both Tarmeji and the nurse on duty. Word quickly spread through the hospital that the billionaire's daughter, long written off as lost, was showing signs of awakening. Doctors tried to explain it scientifically, stimulated nerves, improved circulation, but they could not ignore the fact that the turning point had coincided with the immigrant workers' unusual therapy. For Tarmiji, the change was deeply personal. Each twitch, each moan felt like a conversation, as though Sophia's spirit was whispering back to him from the depths of her unconsciousness. He would often lean close and murmur, "You are strong, Miss Sophia. Don't stop now. Come back." Elizabeth Reynolds began visiting during his sessions, standing silently at the corner of the room. Watching the sincerity in his eyes and the care in his touch, she felt gratitude swelling within her. One night, as she walked out of the room, she whispered to her husband, "This man isn't just helping her body. He's touching her soul." Richard, though still cautious, began to soften. He invited Tarmiji into his office one afternoon and asked, "Why are you doing this? What drives you?" Tarmiji hesitated before answering, "Because no one should give up on her. In my village, I saw people come back to life when everyone else had already buried them in their hearts. I believe she can come back too. I don't do this for money or recognition. I do this because it feels right." For the first time, Richard Reynolds looked at him not as a janitor, but as a man carrying something rare, hope born of sincerity. The hospital corridors buzzed with a new kind of energy. Nurses exchanged glances, and even the most stoic doctors began to admit that something remarkable was happening inside room 507. The once hopeless case of Sophia Reynolds was shifting, little by little, as if unseen hands were pulling her back from the abyss. On the 19th night, a storm raged outside Manhattan. Rain lashed against the glass windows, thunder rolled across the skyline, and the city's lights flickered under the downpour. Inside Sophia's room, the dim night lamp cast a golden glow across her pale face. Tarmiji entered quietly, his small bottle of herbal oil in hand. He inhaled deeply, whispering the prayer his grandfather had once taught him. "Patience brings healing, and love awakens the spirit." He warmed the oil between his palms, the fragrance of ginger and lemongrass filling the air, then placed his hands gently on her back. His fingers pressed with deliberate rhythm, tracing the familiar path along her spine, pausing at each energy point. He matched his breathing with the movement, exhaling slowly as if to share his calm with her. As the session continued, something extraordinary happened. When his thumb pressed the base of her neck, Sophia's body jolted faintly. Her eyelids fluttered, not just a twitch, but a trembling effort to open. Tarmiji froze, hardly daring to believe his eyes. "Miss Sophia," he whispered, leaning closer. Her lips moved, shaping a faint sound, almost inaudible over the hum of machines. Then, with visible effort, her lashes parted for the briefest moment, revealing hazy brown eyes. It lasted only seconds before they closed again. But for Tarmiji, it was as if the universe itself had spoken. Heart pounding, he rushed to call the nurse. Moments later, Doctor Smith hurried in, stethoscope in hand, his expression unreadable as he examined her. "She's responding to stimuli," he confirmed, astonishment breaking through his calm facade. This is no coincidence. Keep doing exactly what you've been doing." When the Reynolds family arrived later that morning, Elizabeth wept openly at her daughter's bedside. "She opened her eyes, Richard," she whispered, clutching his arm. Richard, usually composed, stood silently, his jaw tight as emotion overwhelmed him. He bent down and kissed Sophia's forehead, whispering, "Don't stop fighting, sweetheart." "We're here for Tarmiji." That moment marked a turning point. He realized this was no longer just about fulfilling a duty or repaying fate. He felt a connection with Sophia, one that transcended culture, status, and circumstance. She was not just a patient, she was a life calling out to be saved, and somehow destiny had chosen him to answer. From that night onward, his determination doubled. He worked with even greater care, combining his massages with words of encouragement. Sometimes he would talk about the rice fields back home, the scent of rain on soil, the laughter of children in his village, painting pictures of life, hoping that somewhere deep inside, her spirit would hear him and be drawn back. The once silent room was no longer a place of despair. It was now a sanctuary of hope filled with the heartbeat of possibility. Sophia's fragile awakening became the talk of the hospital. In the cafeteria, nurses exchanged excited whispers. Doctors who had once dismissed the possibility of recovery now visited her room with newfound curiosity. Journalists had not yet been informed. Richard Reynolds was careful to shield his family from the media. But inside the hospital walls, room 507 had become a quiet miracle. By the third week, Sophia's progress grew undeniable. She began to moan softly during massages, her lips forming incomplete words. Once, when Tarmiji gently pressed her hand, her fingers curled faintly around his. The nurses gasped at the sight, and Elizabeth wept silently, clutching her daughter's other hand. "She's coming back," she whispered, her voice trembling. For Tarmiji, each reaction felt like a sacred conversation. He never stopped speaking to her, even when others thought it pointless. "Sophia," he would murmur in his gentle, accented English, "the world is waiting. Your parents are waiting. We all believe in you sometimes." He told her stories of his village in East Java, the rice paddies shimmering at dawn, the scent of jasmine carried on evening winds, the songs of farmers returning home at dusk. Though he didn't know if she understood, he hoped his words painted images vivid enough to guide her back to consciousness. Then came the breakthrough. One evening, as spring blossoms swayed outside the hospital windows, Sophia's eyelids fluttered open for more than just a moment. Her gaze was blurry, unfocused, but undeniably alive. Tarmiji leaned forward, his heart pounding. "Miss Sophia? Can you see me?" Her lips trembled and a faint sound emerged. "Who?" The word was barely audible, but it was enough to shatter weeks of silence. Overwhelmed, Tarmiji smiled warmly. "My name is Tarmiji. I'm your friend. I want you to get well." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, though her body remained weak. Elizabeth, who stood behind Tarmiji, pressed her hands to her mouth, sobbing with joy. She rushed to the hallway to call Richard, who arrived moments later. When Sophia's hazy gaze shifted toward her father, his stern composure cracked. He bent down, clutching her hand, whispering, "Sweetheart, it's Dad. You're safe. Don't be afraid." That night marked the official turning point. Doctors increased physiotherapy sessions, amazed by her resilience. Still, it was Tarmiji's nightly massages that seemed to unlock her body further. Within 2 weeks, she managed to sit upright with support. Another week later, she uttered full sentences, weak but clear. "Water, please. Mom, don't cry. I'm tired." Each word was celebrated like a victory parade. Though recovery remained a long road, the Reynolds family knew the impossible had begun. And at the center of it all was a man who had once been invisible in their world, a janitor with rough hands and a heart of gold. For the first time in years, Richard Reynolds allowed himself to believe in something beyond wealth and medicine. He looked at Tarmiji one evening and said quietly, "You didn't just help her body. You gave this family its soul back." As the weeks turned into months, Sophia's recovery astonished even the most skeptical doctors. With steady physiotherapy by day and Tarmiji's gentle massages by night, she regained strength at a pace no one had predicted. By the end of the second month, she could sit in a wheelchair, engage in short conversations, and smile, an expression her parents had feared they might never see again. The Reynolds family mansion in Upper Manhattan became her sanctuary of healing once she was stable enough to leave the hospital. A lush private garden behind the estate offered fresh air and sunlight, and Sophia spent her afternoons there surrounded by blooming tulips and cherry blossoms imported from Japan. It was in this garden that her bond with Tarmiji deepened. At first, he remained reserved. He continued to address her formally, never daring to cross the invisible boundary of status. She was the heiress of a vast business empire. He was still the immigrant worker whose hands smelled of herbs and cleaning agents. Yet Sophia broke those walls with her kindness. One afternoon, she beckoned him to sit beside her on a wrought iron bench. Her voice, still soft but growing stronger, carried a playful note. "Why do you always stand so far away, Tarmiji? Sit. You've done more for me than anyone else. You're not just staff, you're my friend." He hesitated, then obeyed, lowering himself onto the bench. The fragrance of blossoms filled the air as she turned her face toward him. "Tell me again about your village," she asked. "I like those stories. They make me feel alive." So he spoke of golden rice fields that bent under the wind, like waves of the sea, of children who ran barefoot, chasing kites, of nights when the stars covered the sky like lanterns. Sophia listened with closed eyes, smiling as though transported there herself. "It sounds like freedom," she whispered. not like this city, where people rush but never really live. In those quiet moments, something unspoken grew between them. Tarmiji admired not only her beauty, but her spirit, the resilience that had pulled her from the edge of death. Sophia, in turn, saw in him a sincerity untouched by wealth or ambition. He was unlike the men she had known in her world of business and luxury. Still, Tarmiji kept his feelings locked away. He reminded himself nightly, "She is beyond your reach, do not dream too high." Yet his heart betrayed him every time her eyes brightened when he entered the garden, every time she laughed softly at his broken English. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting a golden glow across the garden, Sophia turned to him and said, "Do you know why I fought to wake up?" He shook his head, unsure. Her gaze lingered on him, steady and warm. "Because there was a voice that kept telling me not to give up. A voice filled with hope. That voice was yours." His breath caught, but he lowered his eyes quickly, afraid of the feelings rising in his chest. For the first time in his life, he realized he was standing at the edge of a love that defied all boundaries. By the time summer arrived, Sophia was walking slowly with the aid of a cane. Each step was celebrated, not just by her family, but also by the hospital staff who had witnessed her transformation. News of her recovery began to spread quietly beyond the hospital walls. When the press finally caught wind of the story, headlines lit up across New York. "Heiress awakens, after months in coma, a miracle in Manhattan." What the newspapers didn't know, at least not yet, was the central figure behind this miracle. To the Reynolds family, it was no secret. Every day, they saw the gratitude in Sophia's eyes whenever she looked at Tarmiji. Every evening, they saw the warmth with which she asked for his company. Richard Reynolds, a man who had built empires with logic and discipline, realized that his daughter's heart had already chosen the man who saved her life. One evening, Richard invited Tarmiji into his study. The room was lined with shelves of leather-bound books and lit by a crystal chandelier. Richard sat behind his mahogany desk, his hands clasped. "Tarmiji," he began, his voice firm yet kind, "you have done more for this family than anyone could have imagined. You not only saved my daughter's life, but you restored her spirit." Tarmiji bowed slightly, his humility intact. "I only did what I could, sir." "Anyone in my place would have tried." Richard shook his head. "No, most would have walked away, but you stayed. You gave us back hope when even the doctors had surrendered. My wife and I have spoken at length. We believe Sophia's future should be with you." Tarmiji's eyes widened, disbelief flooding his expression. "With me?" "But sir, I am just—" Elizabeth Reynolds, who had quietly entered the room, cut him off gently. "You are not just anything. You are the reason my daughter is alive. Wealth, status, business, all of that fades. What matters is the heart, and yours is the purest we've ever seen." Days later, under the canopy of the Reynolds' private garden, a wedding was held. It was elegant but intimate, filled with blossoms, candles, and music that drifted into the summer night. Sophia walked down the aisle in a flowing white gown, her steps steady, her smile radiant. Tarmiji, dressed in a simple black suit, waited with tears glistening in his eyes. Guests marveled at the sight. The union of a billionaire's daughter and an immigrant worker. Some whispered in disbelief, others smiled in admiration. But when the vows were exchanged and Sophia declared, "I do," while holding Tarmiji's trembling hands, every heart in attendance knew they were witnessing something far greater than social convention. Richard stood to address the guests after the ceremony. His voice carried pride and gratitude. "As a token of our appreciation, I am entrusting one of our companies in the healthcare sector to Sophia and Tarmiji. From today, they will lead it together." Applause thundered through the garden. And for Tarmiji, who once arrived in America with nothing but hope, this moment felt like the impossible dream of a humble man who dared to believe. 5 years passed quickly, yet every spring, Sophia and Tarmiji made a tradition of walking together beneath the blossoming trees of Central Park. Each year, when petals drifted like snowflakes to the ground, they paused, remembering the nights in the hospital when life and death balanced so delicately. What had begun as a miracle of survival had grown into a partnership rooted in love, resilience, And Service, the healthcare company entrusted to them by Richard Reynolds, flourished under their leadership. Tarmaji introduced new programs that blended modern American medicine with techniques inspired by his Indonesian heritage. Patients were fascinated by the foundation's unique approach. Advanced therapies combined with gentle massage methods that emphasized both body and spirit. Skeptics soon became believers as recovery rates improved and word of their success spread across the country, but wealth and recognition were never the true goal. For Sophia and Tarmiji, the real legacy lay in helping those who could not afford the kind of care she once received. Together, they established the Light of Heart Foundation, opening free clinics in underserved neighborhoods from New York to Los Angeles. Immigrants, single mothers, the elderly, and children all found care within their walls, delivered with dignity and compassion. Despite his position as co-owner of a growing empire, Tarmaji never abandoned his simple habits. Once a week, he personally worked in the therapy rooms, massaging patients with the same quiet devotion that had awakened Sophia. His rough hands, once dismissed as unworthy in a world obsessed with status, now symbolized healing and sincerity. Many patients wept when they realized that the man treating them was not just a therapist, but the very immigrant whose story had become an inspiration across America. Sophia, meanwhile, thrived not only as an executive, but as a compassionate guide to the patients who came through their doors. She often sat with families telling them, "Don't give up. I was once where your loved one is now. Miracles happen when you least expect them." Her testimony carried the weight of lived truth, and people left her presence with renewed strength. One summer evening, on the porch of their modest home overlooking the Hudson River, the couple reflected on their journey. Sophia leaned against him, her hair catching the golden light of sunset. "Do you realize," she whispered, "that everything changed because you refused to give up on me?" Tarmiji smiled, his eyes misting. "No, Sophia. Everything changed because you fought your way back. I was only the bridge." She shook her head gently. "You were the reason I kept fighting. Love isn't just a feeling, it's medicine, and yours healed me." Their story was later captured in books, documentaries, and countless articles. Yet whenever they were asked about their greatest achievement, their answer never changed. It wasn't the company, the wealth, or the fame. It was the truth that kindness, sincerity, and love could cross every boundary of class, culture, or nation and transform lives forever. For every cherry blossom that fell at their feet, they were reminded of one lesson. The greatest miracles often begin with the simplest acts of compassion.